12 weeks ago, I had what is called Atlantoaxial Dislocation fixation surgery. So I have damage through my whole cervical spine, particularly and most significantly at my C1-C2 junction. When I had surgery, there was no ligaments holding me, so I had complete instability, but I was also dislocated. So um, the facet of my C1 was significantly posterior to the facet of C2. In layman's terms, it means that my head was back, my neck was forward, and only muscles were holding me. Leading up to surgery, I've had lots of visual symptoms for years. It is debilitating, it is exhausting, but I was losing sight intermittently. I was experiencing paralysis daily. I was experiencing symptoms where I would become conscious but not responsive. It was like I call it being locked in my body.
So, Rachel, what's going on?
I still thought, I had thoughts, they were distant, but I couldn't speak, I couldn't move, and I couldn't, most importantly, get myself into a safer position. And in those last couple months, it got to the point where I couldn't swallow, I couldn't close my mouth, and that was becoming pretty high risk. And where am I today? One, I'm extremely lucky that I got diagnosed in time. There are a lot of people out there that become severely ill and without answers. We are neurologically breaking down. Um, and I know of people who um, there isn't an answer, and so they're doing end of life management. For me, I got insanely lucky. I got an extremely experienced surgeon who said yes to my case and was willing to do my surgery. I had to go far. I had to, yeah, get on a plane, take two flights, and travel to have that surgery. And I'm really, really lucky that my my condition stayed stable enough that I got there. And furthering that, I am extremely lucky that there are a lot of people who go in for surgery who are experiencing paralysis prior and who have spinal cord compression, or in my case, brainstem and spinal cord compression. They come out and they don't walk again. Um, and I am. And I'm really, really lucky. Cognitively, it's hard. It's a lot of work. But it's definitely improved from where it was, but I have a really long way to go. I still don't go out, except for now I can do walks, and that's part of my rehabilitation process. I'm getting some treatments, so I'm really fortunate that I've got a couple practitioners that come in here and are working with the rehabilitation process with me and giving me some treatments. And I have a regimented routine of my own body work, working with my brain, working with my body, working with my joints, getting movement, remapping how my leg moves, and getting more connections in parts of my body that have had a lot of adaptation. My left side was the most challenging with paralysis, and in the earlier days when I would just drop. So it's like my head and my whole left side would just kind of do a drop. I'd catch myself and then I'd keep going. And there's a lot of changes there. I have visual exercises I do, which is all part of like not just your sight, but working with what your brain sees, what your inner ear thinks about where you are in space. And I'm working on that. That said, I have very little stamina, and I don't mean tired, I mean sensory. It is a lot. I'm really lucky to be walking, but when I go out for a walk, it takes strategy. So I have a buddy, I have to go with someone because sometimes it can get a bit hairy for me if my balance is really starting to be a struggle and whatnot, and it's at this point it's just a little bit safer. I avoid a lot of like cars passing by because when you really struggle with your brain and balance system and vision, Instead of it just being a car passing by, my brain sees movement and reacts, and I start to feel like I'm falling. I don't understand depth in the same way. I look, I know something's far away, and yet when it's moving, my processing has a really difficult time working with that. So all of a sudden, that thing that should be further away and shouldn't impact me, my body's tensing and my head's moving, and I'm like, what is going on? It takes a lot of tokens, and I get a lot of inaccurate data, so to speak. Another example of that is it gets dark pretty early. The end of the walk was starting to get dark. And so my ability with like light is like bright is bright, dark is even darker. So some of the side streets, it's pretty dim. Cars are passing by, and so if there's little trees at the side of the street, um, the shadows from them, they move in a nice motion. But for me, that feels like I'm gonna fall. So a strategy I have to use is I either crouch down, or I usually it's with my husband. I touch him, so it gives my brain input. Okay, this is upright, we're not falling. I close my eyes and I have to wait it out. I avoid, if I'm walking on the sidewalk and there's going to be a narrow area, so there's high bush and something else going on, my brain can't quite make sense of it. I like a little bit of an open space, yet I also need it defined. So the sidewalk gives me more data that, like, here are the parameters. Maybe this sounds crazy to a lot of people, but I think for other people who have, kind of vestibular sensory issues and whatnot, or when they're really fatiguing their system, it'll make more sense. So I do things like, even when it's not bright out, I have polarized lenses. And so what that does is it just quiets the sensory. I just get a little bit less light, but because they're polarized, I get more definition. I do things sometimes too where I have like a little bit of a soft earplug, so I can just muffle sounds so that I'm just processing less. If I'm gonna be near a construction site, I make sure I go to the other side of the street farther away, because that noise works my brain so hard that it's all of a sudden like juggling. To walk is balance, it's visually processing, it's motion. And then all of a sudden, if there's loud noises coming from somewhere, that becomes a juggling act that's difficult to do. So some of my method at this stage of rehab is limit that sensory so that you can do more, because the walking is so important, and it's also just like good for my soul, because aside from that, I'm inside. I'm not not going in the car yet. That's not the right choice for me. It's way too much processing of motion, and particularly the bumping when I'm in a seated position is just too much for my system right now. Since surgery, I have to work hard to go into inventory, meaning if I'm putting an idea together or I'm working on memory and whatnot, like it's a lot of work. It's very difficult, but I don't have the same stuttering speech. I don't have the same halting speech and whatnot. I'll show. I feel like I'm working really hard to make my brain like to do things that I feel like should be easy. One of the really, really tricky things about, for me and probably a lot of other people with the brainstem compression, is our nervous systems. For me, I couldn't go into parasympathetic, meaning I got stuck in sympathetic nervous system, meaning my body is heightened. I can't go into the restore. So I would become more and more exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. My body could not wind down. And that's starting to improve. I have pain in my spine, I have pressure in my spine, but not like before. I used to have this insanely pressurized sensation, particularly higher up in my neck. And it was not just unbearable, but what it would start to do is I would start to get like, if I couldn't take care of it, that's when the symptoms of being locked in would happen. So I often had to kind of like not just lie flat, but I had to have something. I had a rolled up soft mat that I would put along my spine, so it would give that spine feedback, and then I'd use a 15-pound weighted blanket that someone would put on top of me, so that my spine would get that feedback because it would start to tighten and contort, and I used to constantly feel like my brain was starving, which now I understand was pretty factual. Um, and as much as the cognition and the exhaustion and the headaches, so much headaches, are tough, I don't feel like my brain is starving in the same way. And I think that that's so promising for working my rehabilitation and getting improvements. What needs work is definitely, brain healing, brainstem healing, neurological healing, um, being able to process more sensory, handle noise, handle sight. Um, and my biggest struggle, my vision. It's so limiting. That sensory is so limiting. There's not much I can do. It's all very passive, meaning I can't do much. I can't really do reading or writing, and I do use a lot of adaptive programs, so I listen, but it's not immersive in the same way, and I find that really challenging. That said, I have hope. So I'm thankful and I'm hopeful, and I hold at the same time that this is really hard. It's really hard to be here. But I got my diagnosis and I got a treatment that's done a lot of good so far. And I also hold the fact that I'm one of the lucky ones. And my biggest takeaway, my biggest hope right now is that I can keep working on this and hopefully sharing my story and hopefully helping kind of build more awareness that there are a lot more people out there undiagnosed that have something that just hasn't been imaged and assessed in the right way yet. I think it's really important that people have that opportunity, but even more so that they can shake the stigma of, nothing's wrong or nobody knows what it is or it's all in your head. Like that is it's a tough load to bear. And I want you to know you're not alone, and I'm going to fight for awareness.